Hi everyone, Alex Tardy here with Weather Echo. We've got an update for you for the fall winter outlook. And we've had some recent significant weather in October. We'll talk about that. And does that mean changes for this upcoming winter? Let's see. Okay, let's quickly take a look at the past summer and water year. So, one big feature this summer was the jet stream did not allow the typical monsoon or heat dome pattern to develop, as shown here. So, when you average June through September, the storm track was repeatedly moving across Southern California. Now, that L was those upper lows that got left behind in the jet stream and kept bringing up tropical moisture in the summer and even in the fall. Speaking of the monsoon, it was dry. Now, this is the ranking or percentile. So, Utah, very dry, as shown here in the dark brown. But California was wet. That was the tropical moisture from those Pacific systems drawn northward. There is monsoon, though. You could see it really evident. It was stuck in eastern Colorado and New Mexico in the green shaded here from June through September. Now, temperature wise, really warm across those dry areas of Utah and Arizona. So the upper ridge or heat dome was around, but it was displaced further north. And the upper troughs or the storm systems that brought up tropical moisture kept the west coast of California right along the coast cooler than normal, as shown here in the blue. Now, across the United States, this is how things looked June through September. Really warm in the northwest, really warm in the northeast. So, this again is the ranking. So, the northwest was near record warm, a lot of areas. Now, the middle of the country was cool or average, and you can even see the coast of California showing up even on this larger map here as cooler than normal. Now, when you look at the precipitation across the United States, not only warm, but it was drier than normal in the Pacific Northwest, the Northeast. The middle of the country was really wet, the Central Plains, North Texas. And look at the dryness that shows up even in Utah on this larger map and the wetness from the tropical moisture surges, several of them into Southern California. Now, the water year. So, what's the water year? Get a lot of questions on this. So, October through September. That's the normal storm track of the westerlies or the jet stream across the United States. What really stands out is the Southwest, not just dry during the summer, but dry during the entire water year. There were pockets of wetter than normal in Oregon, far northern California, the Central Plains, so not only wet summer, but wet water year as well. Now look at this. This is precipitation percent of normal just for October, so the start of the new water year. Really making up for it in Arizona, Utah, Nevada, and California. So this was multiple systems. Two Pacific storms brought tropical moisture, including Priscilla, which is evident on that plume of dark green in Arizona. Now, also the most recent cold storm that brought rain and snow to California is evident on here as well. So three different storm systems. How'd that happen? The weather pattern dipped across the west coast. So unusually severe amplitude in the weather pattern allowed the cold air to come down directly out of Western Canada. Those three weather systems or Pacific storms all brought in moisture, including the most recent one. Two of them were tropical moisture, so they were really laden with moisture, a lot of precipitation. Now, in between, you can see there was an unusual block in the northeast where they continue to be warm and dry, an unusual block in the Gulf of Alaska, as shown here. So that allowed this weather pattern. Now, does that mean this weather pattern will continue through all winter? Well, typically no. Okay, so when we look at the ocean temperatures or the departure from normal, the anomaly, we first look at the equator or the ENSO region, blue. That means La Nina is forming, and that's expected. Now, we've got a lot of other things going on with the warm pockets or marine heat waves. Now, in the northern Pacific and eastern Pacific, separate areas of marine heat waves are warmer than normal water. Now, where we typically see a lot of our moisture come from in the central Pacific, there the water is slightly above or actually normal. Now, where we typically see a lot of the wind and cold energy in the Gulf of Alaska or North Pacific, mixed bag up there. So water temperatures warmer than normal in the north, but in the important tropical region, a little bit cooler than normal, as shown here. Now, let's take a look at what this recent storm brought. Beautiful photos up at Mammoth Mountain. So, 1 to 2 feet of snow occurred from that Pacific storm. So, we literally jumped from tropical moisture surges to cold winter storms. So, quite extreme. Now, this is the old outlook. We were showing a storm track for December through February, cutting through the northern Rockies, Pacific Northwest, and then into New England. We'll take a look and see if that's expected to change. Now, this would result in really warm temperatures, continued warmth for most of the United States, and a somewhat buildup of cold or colder than normal air in Canada. Okay, so is anything changing? So the latest information shows that not only will October mid to late be active in the Pacific Northwest, could be active in November as well, with a dip in the jet stream, the black line shown here. But the warm, dry conditions continue in the east. Now, things really potentially could change in December, where you see a whole drop in the jet stream in the middle of the country for snowier, wetter conditions there. And you see some increasing dryness along the west coast and continued dry in the southeast. Now, if we go looking at temperature, October is featuring really warm conditions in eastern Canada, eastern United States. That looks like it could continue based on the jet stream pattern in November, but then start to break down in December as a lot of unusually cold, colder than normal air builds up in western Canada, allowing that change. Now, when we go into the heart of winter, January, February, really important months. That's when the West sees most of their precipitation for reservoir storage and snowpack. We do see a dip in the jet stream potentially in January into Northern California and then across the central United States. Potential very active pattern because you've got a lot of cold air building to the north, colder than normal, and that continued warm air to the south. The February pattern, the same, a little more buckling, focused with wet, snowy pattern, and then that dry pattern in the southeast and potential dry pattern creeping into Northern California. And temperatures, as I mentioned, this will be the battle zone. So this really sets up the jet stream. So not only do we have cold to the north and warm to the south, we have unusually cold predicted for Canada and unusually warm for the south. So yes, that is a recipe for a strong, what we call gradient or wind speed area that is your storm track. Now, if we look at the overall prediction, December through February, what's changed? Well, we don't see much changing. We still see the dip in the jet stream overall between December through February, averaged from Oregon into the Rockies and Great Basin, and then across the central United States, Ohio Valley, and into New England. But we do see more cold air projected for Western Canada. So again, that basically means the recipe for very active storm track along that black line. Okay, we are still expecting a weak La Nina. The latest forecasts indicate that should materialize in the middle of the winter. Now, remember, when we identify a La Nina or an El Nino, we need a few months of it occurring consecutively, not just 1 week or 1 month. Now, when you look at all weak La Ninas, which we expect to go into, colder than normal in the west, and especially the northwest. Since 2000, wetter than normal in California, but drier than normal in the Pacific Northwest. That's a big change since 2000. So we'll take a look at more of these analogs. Now, when you look at all La Ninas since the 80s, the traditional La Nina was wet in the northwest, dry in the southeast, and dry in Southern California. So the coolness stays. It's gotten even colder in a lot of the recent La Ninas in the northwest, but we don't see this classic pattern of just wet in the northwest. La Nina, all since 2000. You can see all different types of La Nina, strong, medium, weak. Really cold signature in the northwest, but when you put them all together, you see a dry signature in Northern California, continued dry in the southeast, and really warm when you look at all La Ninas since 2000 in the eastern United States. When you look at the ENSO neutral, so what does that mean? That's neither La Nina or El Nino. You see an unusual dry signature in California and the East Coast. And you see really mild conditions in California, lack of a storm track, and the same thing for the East Coast. So, really a mixed bag when you're in that neutral situation since 2000. Now, when we look along the equator at an ENSO neutral since the 80s, we see that the country dominated below normal. Most of the country, except for the southeast and southwest, were below normal in the 80s. So we've seen a lot of warming of the climate, and that's why looking at these analogs and going too far back in a warming, changing climate can be tricky. Precipitation with the neutral was really dry on the west coast and continued dry on the east coast. So it's important to keep in mind with a changing climate or a warming climate or a drying or a climate getting more moist in certain parts of the country that these analogs can't always be reliable. Thanks for joining, everyone. More information is available on our blog if you sign up. You can check out all the resources I used here are available at weatherecho.com. We're also posting information, short videos on TikTok and YouTube, and then real-time information as well on X. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.